So I want to welcome everybody today. Poetry is an unusual subject, and I wasn't too sure how many we would have of finding it of interest, but it's wonderful to see you, and I'm really glad you're here. You probably know that today is sponsored by the Friends of the Library, of the Peabody Institute Library. My name is Marsha Coogan. I'm president of Friends, and we are a volunteer organization. But before I start to tell you about that, I just want to remind you to silence your phones. And we hope you'll stay afterwards to just socialize and have more coffee or tea, desserts, whatever. The restroom location's out in the hallway there, and if you need to use the restroom, there's a key right inside the children's room. You have to get the key to use it. So I mentioned to you that it's the Friends of the Library that's sponsoring it today, and a little background on the Friends. We're a volunteer organization, 501c3, and we're dedicated to promoting awareness of the library, support library projects, and offer additional cultural or educational programs not already covered by the town budget. Examples of our events have been classical music concerts, donations to the children's room for art supplies. We sponsor some music programs and concerts. We had one in January that was great fun. The annual book sale we put on. We have some Zoom presentations that we sponsored, and we also have an annual holiday open house in December. Okay. Coming up, we're going to sponsor a concert this summer out in the library lawn. You know how the recreation department sometimes has these outside concerts, so we're going to be sponsoring one of that. So I think it's going to be in August, so more information to come on that, but that should be great fun too. So we promote our activities on the library website. We bring around flyers around town, and then there's a weekly newsletter that the library puts out. It usually comes out every Sunday, and it's a wonderful newsletter. So if you're not on the distribution list, be sure to check at the front desk and try to get on the list, okay? It's brief, but it's done well, and you can actually, if registration is required, you can actually just click on and register. It's pretty good. So most of our funds come from the book sale that we have, but we also are supported by membership fees and grants and donations. The book sale proceeds support the Museum Pass program, and that's a great program. Right now we have 11 venues on there. New England Aquarium, Museum of Fine Arts, Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, PBS Museum, just to name a few. And we're also in the process right now of adding the Boston Children's Museum as well. So these passes can be reserved online, or you can stop at the front desk to check into it. And just to give you an idea, a lot of times it's a discounted admission. It might be half price, whatever, and so it comes in handy. This year's book sale will be in June, and that's not too far away when you stop to think of it. So I hope everybody's going to tuck away some books and do a little spring cleaning, whatever, and donate. We'll be accepting books June 5th through June 10th, but there'll be more information on that to come. So to summarize, your Friends membership is important to us, and if you aren't a current member, we hope that you'll think about joining. Membership levels start at $20, and there's some blue brochures over there on the table that tell you more about the Friends organization. So now I'd like to give you a little information on Carol, on Reverend Carol Strecker, who's going to be doing today's program. Reverend Carol is currently the Interim Minister at the Northshore Unitarian Universalist Church in Danvers, and has over 20 years of experience in UU congregations. Forgive me for reading this, but otherwise I'll forget it. She began her career at the Arlington Street Church in Boston, and has served as an interim minister in Milford, New Hampshire, and Kingston, Ontario, before coming to Danvers. Before entering the ministry, Reverend Carol was a social worker. She graduated from BU in 1989 with an MSW, and has worked with pregnant and parenting teens, runaway and homeless youth, and teenage girls with addictions. Her roots are from the Midwest, having grown up in St. Louis and spending many summers at a camp on the shores of Lake Michigan. In her spare time, she enjoys all kinds of music. She plays a variety of musical instruments, including guitar and mandolin, and she loves to sing. Her wife, Kate, is a nurse in the emergency department of the Veterans Hospital in Augusta, Maine, and they have a daughter, Hillary. Enjoying just about any outdoor activity, she lives on a pond in Maine, where she is able to explore the natural world through Mary Oliver's lenses. So today, she's going to share her thoughts and interest with us and her experience and so forth. So we're indeed fortunate to have her, so I hope you'll join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Marcia. It's quite an introduction. Appreciate it. And thank you all for being here on a Saturday afternoon in April. I know the weather is cooperating nicely. The clouds came in just in time for you to want to come in and take shelter here. But it is wonderful to have this opportunity to be with you to talk about Mary Oliver's poetry on this amazing confluence. It's National Poetry Month. April is National Poetry Month. And it's Earth Day. What a great merging, right? And so we're here to talk a little bit about Mary Oliver's life and work. And I want to get right into her poems by starting with her poem, Why I Wake Early. Hello, sun on my face. Hello, you who made the morning and spread it over the fields, and into the faces of the tulips and the nodding morning glories, and into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best preacher that ever was, dear star that just happens to be where you are in the universe, to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the great hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now how I start the day in happiness, in kindness. And to me, that poem sort of encapsulates a big part of what Mary Oliver is all about. Really paying attention and being grateful for every moment that she's alive and finding that connection with the natural world that expresses that connection that she can put into words and share with us, which is awesome, right? So I don't know how many of you know, but Mary Oliver's real happiness was dogs. She actually wrote a whole book called Dog Songs. And so I wanted to begin by sharing some of these dog poems with you. And I think that, part of the reason that Mary Oliver loved dogs so much was that dogs are always totally present in the moment. Mary was a student of paying attention. That was probably her lifelong passion, her study, her goal in life was to deepen her ability to pay attention to life as it was, as she was living it. And dogs don't have to work at all to do that. They're just always very present in the moment. There's no past, there's no future. They just are. And so one writer said, I think dogs were probably Mary Oliver's Mary Oliver, if that makes sense. It made sense to me at the time. So the first poem is called, If You Are Holding This Book, which I am. You may not agree, you may not care, but if you are holding this book, you should know that of all the sights I love in this world, and there are plenty, very near the top of the list is this one. Dogs without leashes. How it begins. A puppy is a puppy is a puppy. He's probably in a basket with a bunch of other puppies. Then he's a little older, and he's nothing but a bundle of longing. He doesn't even understand it. Then someone picks him up and says, I want this one. Every dog's story. I have a bed, my very own. It's just my size, and sometimes I like to sleep alone with dreams inside my eyes. But sometimes dreams are dark and wild and creepy, and I wake and I'm afraid, though I don't know why. But I'm no longer sleepy, and too slowly the hours go by. So I climb on the bed where the light of the moon is shining on your face, and I know it will be morning soon. Everybody needs a safe place. I just think these are brilliant. And most people haven't heard these to my knowledge, so it's nice to be able to share these with you. Conversations. said Bear. I know I'm supposed to keep an eye on you, but it's difficult the way you lag behind and keep talking to people. Well, how can you keep your eye on me when you're half a mile ahead? True, said Bear, but I'm thinking of you all the time. I had to go away for a few days, so I called the kennel and made an appointment. I guess Bear overheard the conversation. Love and company, said Bear, are the adornments that change everything. I know they'll be nice to me, but I'll be sad, sad, sad. And pitifully, he wrung his paws. I canceled the trip. The sense of humor at play here is just delightful, I think. School. You're like a little wild thing that was never sent to school. Sit, I say, and you jump. Come, I say, and you go galloping down the sand to the nearest dead fish, with which you perfume your sweet neck. It is summer. How many summers does a little dog have? Run. Run, Percy. This is our school. Little dog's rhapsody in the night. He puts his cheek against mine and makes small, expressive sounds. And when I awake, or awake enough, he turns upside down, his forepaws in the air, and his eyes dark and fervent. Tell me you love me, he says. Tell me again. Could there be a sweeter arrangement? Over and over, he gets to ask, and I get to tell. The sweetness of dogs. What do you say, Percy? I'm thinking of sitting out on the sand to watch the moon rise. It's full tonight. So we go, and the moon rises so beautiful. It makes me shudder, makes me think about time and space, makes me take measure of myself. One iota pondering heaven. Thus we sit, myself thinking how grateful I am for the moon's perfect beauty, and also, oh, how rich it is to love the world. Percy, meanwhile, leans against me and gazes up into my face as though I were just as beautiful as the perfect moon. Unconditional love, for sure. And the last one, the first time Percy came back. The first time Percy came back, he was not sailing on a cloud. He was loping along the sand as though he had come a great way. Percy, I cried out and reached to him those white curls, but he was unreachable. As music is present, yet you can't touch it. Yes, it's all different, he said. You're going to be very surprised. But I wasn't thinking of that. I only wanted to hold him. Listen, he said, I miss you too. And now you'll be telling stories of me coming back, and they won't be false, and they won't be true. But they'll be real. And then, as he used to, he said, let's go. And we walked down the beach together. So I highly recommend Dog's Songs. And so now I'd like to invite us to go a little deeper into just one of Mary Oliver's poems. One that's a favorite for many folks. I gave you a handout. You have a copy of the poem Summer. But I'd like to invite us into a practice that's really it's a spiritual practice. It's a practice of connecting, and to me spirituality means connection. It's an interfaith practice. It's called Lectio Divina. Is anybody familiar with it? Yes. It has its roots in the Jewish tradition. It's an approach to reading sacred text that invites the reader to go deeper. In Unitarian Universalism, which is my tradition, These poems are sacred text, as are a lot of poems or texts that we find meaningful. You can use it with any text that's meaningful for you. Haggadah is the name of this kind of interpretation of a text. The early Christian, the Desert Mothers and Fathers understood the power of this practice and used it to interpret Christian scripture, so a lot of people are familiar with it as part of the Christian tradition. This afternoon, we're going to use this poem, The Summer's Day, as our sacred text, as it were. There are 5 parts of this practice, which I will just briefly review with you. They're on the flip side of your poem, so you can actually take this home, and if you want to engage with another, if you brought a poem that you'd rather use with this, that's fine too. Or if you know one by heart, which is also a wonderful practice with poetry, is to learn poems by heart and really taking them in. But this practice has 5 parts. The first one is simply reading through the text and inviting questions like, what does this poem say? Just read the poem, listening for a particular word or phrase that really resonates with you, a phrase that you can focus in on. And then the second phase is meditation on that phrase, really thinking about what that phrase means to you, repeating it perhaps to yourself. If you have a pen or pencil, you might even want to circle it or underline it on the paper, but just so you have it in your mind's eye, and thinking about how that phrase, what it evokes for you, how it makes you feel. The third phrase is called prayer, which is generating energy, connecting you with yourself, others, the universe, life itself. How does this particular phrase connect you? Like, think of those ripples, those concentric circles going out, starting with yourself. Is there something in the poem that connects you, something deeper in yourself, before you think about how it might connect you with others? Fourth, contemplating, resting in this place of connection. Really think about those connections and just find your place there. Settle into that place of connection. And finally, the fifth phase, as you re-engage in your daily life, you can bring this phrase with you, the meaning of these words with you, and ask yourself questions like, what difference might this text make in how I live my life? How might it help me to re-engage with the world as I move through the world? Are there any challenges it presents? Any inroads it might offer? Any calls to action? Things like that. So you have the 5 steps. You don't have to remember all that. And I'll review them again as we go through. But first, I'm going to read The Summer's Day. You can, read right along with me if you'd like. And then we'll go through the rest of the steps. Who made this world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should one have done? Does everything die at last? And too soon? Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So I invite you to read through the poem again on your own and pick out a phrase that has particular meaning for you. Maybe it's not even the last phrase of the poem, although that one's certainly evocative, and probably one of her most famous phrases, quoted on everything from coffee mugs to bumper stickers to fridge magnets, but one certainly worth carrying with us. take some time to read through the poem on your own and find a word or a phrase that says, I'm here for you today. Everybody have a phrase, a word or a phrase? What does it mean for you? What does it evoke for you, in you? And what kinds of connections? Self, others, life itself, does this word or phrase inspire? Can you come to rest in this place of connection? Is this a familiar place or someplace that feels new and different? Especially on this Earth Day, perhaps. And finally, as you re-engage with your life, what possibilities might this process open up for you? What difference might this text make in your life? We won't take a lot of time to sit with that right now, but you're certainly invited to return to this practice at your leisure, and spend as much time with it as you'd like, with whatever text you'd like. I find it is a very meaningful way to go deeper into a text that's meaningful for you. You may say, oh, I love that poem, but what is it about the poem that you love so much? Poems are really cool because they offer us symbols that are like diving boards. We can take them and dive right off into the deep end of subjective meaning, what's meaningful for us. They're very sparse, right? They offer us sort of a framework and some images that can become symbolic for us. But if I ask each one of you what that last phrase of that poem means, you come up with as many different answers as there are people in this room, and then some probably. And that's one of the coolest things about poetry, is that poems allow us to jump off into the deep end and make our own meaning. And that's what makes it meaningful for us. But for now, I want to ask this question. This is sort of a rhetorical question. What is it about Mary Oliver's poems in particular, and her prose too? She's written several books of prose, which are also very meaningful, that speak to so many of us. Well, I think a big part of it is that Mary Oliver dedicated her entire life to learning how to pay deep attention to everything. And she also dedicated her life to writing about that every day. This wasn't just some gift she was given. She really, it was a discipline for her I read somewhere that she left pencils in trees all over Provincetown, so that when she became inspired, as she was wandering around the dunes and in town, she'd always know there would be a pencil there for her to write in her notebook. She also went out very early in the morning before dawn and watched that change, that transition time from darkness to light, when the world is waking up, the night creatures are going to bed, and the day creatures are coming into life. And it was in that liminal space that she did a lot of her observing of what was happening in the natural world. So we are gifted with her dedication to focusing her attention on all of the different ways that life manifests itself. Focusing our gaze on nature's small, simple, everyday, ordinary miracles. Like the grasshopper, right? How many of you have held a grasshopper in your hand as a kid and looked at its jaw and going, oh my God, look at it, or its eyes, and oh my, look at that, I can't believe it's like, is this real or some alien creature that's, descended from another planet? But it's an earthly being, and Mary took the time to describe those things for us, so that when we come back to poems like this one, we remember having those experiences, especially as children. And I think a lot of times we think her poetry is very evocative of experiences that most of us have had in childhood, maybe not so much as we grow older. But she was writing like this up until into her 70s, and still wandering around, the dunes on the Cape until she was quite elderly. So this was her thing. This is what she did, and she invites us to engage this way, regardless of our age, regardless of our station in life, and what keeps us from focusing on these ordinary miracles, to return to that place that connects us to who we really are, which is part of the interconnected web of all existence. So I'm grateful for that. I often need those little, reminders. Her description of the grasshopper is so vivid. It touches the memory in our mind's eye. We can see it and remember what it's like to ponder and be amazed, that sense of wonder. It takes me to a place I know, somewhere I've been, looking carefully, listening deeply, tuning in and listening to life. That process of tuning in and focusing reconnects me with a strong sense of wonder, pointing me in a direction of something larger than myself. I don't know exactly what a prayer is, Mary writes, but I do know how to pay attention. Doesn't everything die at last, end too soon? Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Pay attention, and you will see something essential. This was her quest, her life's work, to pay attention and to write about it every day. Simply by observing what points to big questions, questions that may not have finite, concrete answers, but the experience of connection, that we're somehow part of all that is, can ground us in something that feels very real in a world, especially within the last few years, that feels surreal, right? At her death, I listened to an interview that she gave with Kristen Tippett, who is the host of On Being, also one of my favorite radio shows of all time. She did an interview with Mary Oliver on Being, which I highly recommend. You can still find it online. Kristen Tippett always begins her interviews by asking her guests about their spiritual backgrounds, which I was very curious about. And Mary Oliver talked about going to Sunday school as a child, but she had a lot of trouble with the resurrection, so she didn't join the church. But she went on to say that spiritual ideas were probably more important to her than any others who did go on to join the church. She said spirituality was one of the most important interests of her life, and that life is much richer with a spiritual part to it. And that got me wondering what spirituality was for her. And as I mentioned, for me, spirituality is about the experience of connection. Spirit is the life force that moves in and through and among us, connecting us to all that is. Spiritual practice is engaging in something that cultivates and strengthens that sense of connection. And you can find many different ways of strengthening your connections in the world. But for Mary, the process was walking through the woods and writing, clearly a kind of walking meditation for her, a practice that she says actually saved her life. And here's where we go a little deeper into Mary's background. She was sexually abused by her father from a very young age. So home was a very painful place for her to be. She sought refuge in the woods, and what she found there was life abundant. Source of strength and personal connection to something larger than the small, sad world of her childhood. She found a home and a place to belong by connecting to what she called her place in the larger family of things, which is another one of those phrases that really resonates with me, that I carry with me through my life. And perhaps this is the sense of being called to life in our place in this larger family of things that speaks to many of us. And you may be familiar with her poem, Wild Geese, which is, again, one of her more better known poems. Wild geese, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Mary found her place in the family of things in the woods after feeling very alone and isolated as a child growing up. I've read a lot of Mary Oliver poems, but this one really seems to resonate with many, many people for a lot of different reasons, as you can imagine. We humans can be pretty hard on ourselves. We can spend so much energy beating ourselves up that we lose touch with that soft, vulnerable animal that loves and needs love. It can leave us feeling isolated and alone. Mary Oliver invites us back into connection with one another. Tell me your despair. Tell me your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. She invites us back into connection with the natural world. Meanwhile, the world goes on, this big, beautiful world, drawn in by her powers of observation, the sun and the rain and the call of the wild geese. We've all heard it. We've all heard it calling us home. And we're reminded, once again, that we're part of something wonderful, something amazing, something so much larger than ourselves. The sense of wonder that connects us with these sights and sounds and points us both to our tender places and our source of strength. When you know a little bit more about Mary Oliver's life, you quickly come to realize that her ability to write with so much joy and gratitude comes from an intimate relationship with pain, isolation, and loneliness. There is healing in her words, her own and ours too, when we allow her experience of wonder and gratitude to open our hearts and minds, capturing our imagination and announcing our place in the larger family of things. Theologian Matthew Fox writes, the day Mary Oliver graduated from high school, she left home and never returned. Her poem, The Journey, which is very different from most of her other poems, captures something of that day when she was able to walk away and save the only life that she could save. The journey. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and the wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stone. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Powerful. Courage, strength, fortitude. She says it took her years to get her life back. What saved her was her courage and the healing power of nature, all of it of a piece. Not just some romanticized notion of natural beauty that's there for our benefit, but tooth and claw as well. One or two things. One or two things are all you need to travel over the blue pond, over the deep roughage of the trees and through the stiff flowers of lightning. Some deep memory of pleasure and some cutting knowledge of pain. Pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, life and death, it's all of a piece. Indivisible. It wasn't until after Mary Oliver's death that I started reading a book of Mary Oliver's essays entitled simply Upstream. The title essay begins this way. In the beginning, I was so young and such a stranger to myself, I hardly existed. I had to go out into the world and see it and hear it and react to it before I knew at all who I was, what I wanted to be. I walked all one spring day, upstream, sometimes in the midst of ripples, sometimes along the shore. My company were violets, Dutchman's breeches, spring beauties, bloodroot, ferns rising so curled one could feel the upward push of the delicate hairs upon their bodies. My parents were downstream, not far away then, farther away because I was walking the wrong way, upstream, instead of downstream. Finally, I was advertised on the hotline of help, and yet there I was, slopping along happily in the stream's coolness. So maybe it was the right way after all. If this was lost, let us all be lost always. The beech leaves were just slipping their copper coats, pale green and quivering, they arrived upon the year. My heart opened and opened again. The water pushed against my effort. Then its glassy permission to step ahead touched my ankles, the sense of going towards the source. I do not think that I ever, in fact, returned home. And yet she did. She created her own home, her own place in that larger family of things. She knew she was walking upstream against the current, as it were. And she knew that she knew what she was walking away from. She didn't know where she was going, but she was open to the mystery. And that's something I really appreciate about Mary Oliver as well. Her sense of curiosity and wonder, and yes, that there are questions that can't be answered. There's so much we will never know. But what she found was comfort, acceptance, and a sense of being part of so much more than her pain. There is great wisdom there. Her way of seeing and being in the world is an inspiration for those of us struggling to garner strength when life becomes too small. When we feel isolated and alone, we all have eyes to see and ears to hear the wild geese calling us home to our place in the larger family of things. I thank you for joining me on this journey. And I'd love to invite anyone who brought a poem. You were invited to bring a poem of Mary Oliver's if you wanted to share with the rest of us. Did anybody bring anything to share? Yay, come on.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
One of my favorite poems is The Eskimos Have No Word for War. It's
Huh?
sort of, so do you know that poem?
No, come, read.
Well, I
Sure.
wonder why it's here and how she got there.
I don't know the answer. Let's all ponder it together. Come on up and read it for us so everyone can hear you.
Oh, here, I hope I can make it. No.
Oh.
No.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine, I'm just late.
Well, just stay there and read, but read loud.
No, I'll come up there.
Okay.
Siri wouldn't tell me how to get here.
Oh, Siri. Bad Siri. Oh, my goodness.
So, the background is, you mentioned Kingston, Ontario.
Yeah.
My husband went to college, Queen's University.
I was just there last week.
Huh?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Kingston is a lovely town.
Yes, it is.
And he spent a lot of time, he spent his summers working for a company in the Northwest Territories, not Alaska, Northwest Territories. And he was very fond of the natives. And so when he was tragically killed, I was at a diaconate meeting at my church, and they asked if I would read the prayer, or if I would say a prayer. I read this poem. It's not a prayer, but all her poems are. But my curiosity is, how did it get in this book of her other poems?
Well, let's hear it, and I haven't read, I probably have read it, but I don't remember it, so it's special to you, so I'm glad you
Well,
shared it
you
with us.
see how I've got this book.
Yes, that's the best one.
The Eskimos have no word for war. Trying to explain it to them leaves one feeling ridiculous and obscene. Their houses, like white bowls, sit on a prairie of ancient snowfalls, caught beyond thaw or the swift changes of night and day. Am I being heard?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. They listen politely and stride away. With spears and sleds and barking dogs to hunt for food, the women wait, chewing on skins or singing songs, knowing that they have hours to spend, that the luck of the hunter is often late. Later, by fires and boiling bones in steaming kettles, they welcome me. Far kin, pale brother, to share what they have in a hungry time, in a difficult land. While I talk on of the southern kingdoms, cannon, armies, shifting alliances, airplanes, power, they chew their bones and smile at one another.
That's beautiful.
It was, the drums of war were beating heavily in our world, and I, of course, and my family were totally against that, and this really spoke to me. So thank you for.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
Yes, I do.
Well, thank thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, and I would venture to say that war is antithetical to interconnection, right? So that would probably be why I would say it was included in that collection, is that she was talking about the connection between the Eskimos and the pale person, and the animal and the life of being connected to the hunters and hunter-gatherers, and it does not compute, right?
The person were the people like my husband who were there working and were invited into their bowls, their homes to have a meal, because he often talked about that.
Yeah, so they were making connections,
Yeah.
not war,
Yes.
which breaks connections, right? Yeah. Wow, powerful. Anybody else have something they'd like to share? Wow.
This is
Go on.
wage peace.
Oh, here we go. Oh, it's a theme.
I think this was written after the terrorist attack in New York. It's called Wage Peace. Wage peace with your breath. Breathe in firemen and rubble. Breathe out buildings and flocks of red-winged blackbirds. Breathe in terrorists and breathe out sleeping children and freshly mown fields. Breathe in confusion and breathe out maple trees. Breathe in the fallen and breathe out lifelong friendships intact. Wage peace with your listening, hearing sirens. Pray loud. Remember your tools, flower seeds, clothespins, clean rivers, make soup, play music, learn the word for thank you in 3 languages, learn to knit and make a hat. Think of chaos as dancing raspberries. Imagine grief as the out-breath of beauty or the gesture of fish. Swim for the other side. Wage peace. Never has the world seemed so fresh and precious. Have a cup of tea and rejoice. Act as if armistice has already arrived. Don't wait another minute. Amen.
Thank you. Well, it's pretty easy to see why these ideas, and there are many juxtaposed ways of connecting and being interconnected and being creative and thinking in that poem as well. It reminded me there's a Buddhist practice called Tonglen practice. You may be familiar with it, where you breathe in the suffering of the world. I do this when I watch the news at night. You breathe in the suffering and you breathe out love and compassion. You take it in as a witness and you breathe out, you send love and kindness back out into the world. That poem reminds me of that practice. So I thank you for sharing and for being with me and sharing this time together. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that they would like to make at this point?
Did she have any siblings, or do you know?
I've never heard that she did.
No.
No, I'm not the exhaustive source
Did she always
for sure.
live on the Cape, or?
She grew up in Ohio.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But then she moved to Provincetown and loved it and lived there the rest of her life.
Did she have any partners?
Yes.
Yes.
A lifelong partner. What was her name?
Molly below.
Yes, Molly. Molly.
Molly.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'll just close with this quote. You've probably heard this too. It's from the poem in Blackwater Wood. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes, to let it go. To let it go. Thank you, folks.
So meaningful to all of us. Thank you very, very much. Wow, I have a little tear here, but I'll recover. Anyways, please stay and have have some coffee, and there's lots of desserts over there. I think we, okay, good. I think we were very generous with the dessert, so please help us. I don't need any more. And, if anybody did not get a coffee of the handout, we've got extras here. I'll put them up over the table here, okay? So thank you, everybody, for being here. Come join us over here, and I think Carol's gonna stay for a little bit, chat if you'd like, right? Okay, that's great. Okay. So again, thank you, Carol. Okay.